Welcome back to the Solutions Lab. I'm Trevor Schubert, Solutions Specialist and Manager of our white glove operations here at D&H. Today's webcast is all about K-12. And if you've followed us, the lab that is, the last few years, you've noticed that this has been a huge focal point for us as we've covered it in many webcasts previously. Initially, a few years ago, I think we started out with some of the major areas like the device refreshes for the students themselves and for the faculty, as well as then the network refreshes that were necessary to handle the new bandwidth that this cloud era of devices would start to consume. Above and beyond that, I think we started to find places in some of the subcategories like how to deploy signage on these new networks in these new environments, and also how to tie everything together with the ever-important management consoles from Google and from Microsoft. But where those webcasts have typically aired in the spring time frame to take advantage of the summer bidding and buying season, otherwise known as the harvest season, this webcast is a bit more strategic as we're focusing on new emerging technology and some of the buzzwords that you may have heard out there, buzzwords like STEM, STEAM, VR, and AR. We're going to show you some of the hardware that breaks up those buzzwords, most importantly, show you how to sell that hardware and really take advantage of how to do what's known as curriculum-based selling. So we're presenting a story to those schools about where this would fit in the classroom, what curriculums it would fit into, and ultimately start trying to make some room if they have it in their budget now, and if not, most importantly, that they're planning for it in the future, because we've heard it a few times up to this point where that was great, I wish I had it in my budget for this year, hopefully next year. So let's get some of that underway. Let's look at some of those technologies now, and let's start off by focusing on a product that I'd like to refer to a little bit as the Swiss Army knife of K-12. This is the new HP Sprout Pro G2. After Sprout, I'm going to cover some of the VR options that we have available now for D&H and some of the emerging technologies that we're looking to the horizon to fill for you. And lastly, we'll look at some of the enhancements that we've made to our white glove facilities over the years, most specifically the introduction last year of laser etching and how that has improved the type of repeat business that we're seeing from our customers and ultimately your customers to this day. So you may have heard of the HP Sprout before. That technology has been on the market for a little while now. However, that was the G1 model, and this is the brand new, as of this May, G2 model. The similarities between the two are the fact that they are an all-in-one unit that is truly one of a kind. And I know I mentioned it before as sort of a Swiss Army knife because it does a lot of interesting things. Another way to look at that is kind of the modern cell phone. If we look at cell phones from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they truly did just one or two things. We were answering calls, we were sending messages. However, now with cameras, with built-in computing power, with the ability to answer emails, it is this all-in-one device that makes the price point that much more justifiable. But again, where this one is truly in a league of its own is the fact that it has an overhead projector, an overhead high-def scanner, forward-facing webcam, and then ultimately a touchpad that I'll show you in just a minute that comes down and projects a second screen that you can manipulate full-blown pressure sensitivity. So rather than continue to just talk features and look at bullet points, let's actually get into some of the applications and let's look at some of the hardware. I'm just going to move this out of the way and turn this guy around. We've got to make some room for the touchpad. As I'm doing this, I'll mention one of the things I know for sure that was a major improvement was the fact that the G1 was running on an overlay of Windows 8 or Windows 8.1, and the G2 model is truly full-blown standard Windows 10, but with the Creators Update. So everything should work exactly like it should if you're familiar with Windows 10. Exactly like it should if you're familiar with Windows 10. So let's look at the touchpad now. So overhead mat, full touch pressure sensitivity, and a docking station up top here with mag locks that interface right into the bottom of the bezel. So once we snap this in place, and it truly does snap, watch your fingers. You hear a little audible tone, which means we're docking. And think about just plugging in a second screen. It's almost the same experience in terms of the type of responsiveness you're getting from Windows. Now I'm looking at a display. That's the exact display that I had up here. So similar to how most of us have had dual monitors up to this point with a left and a right. Now we have a top and a bottom that we can interface with and manipulate with. I can bring applications from the top down to the bottom. But let's get into the video capture portion of this so we can you can see some of the things I'm talking about. Before I do that though, I will show you two quick other things. Is that standard mouse and keyboard come with it as any typical all-in-one you normally should. One of the other big differentiators is that this is a full-blown active stylus built on Wacomb's pressure sensitivity and their technology. So we're looking at a full 2,048 levels of pressure sensitivity, which is pretty compelling when you look at as one of the de facto standards in most of the Cintiq or the Intuos line from Wacom as far as that level is concerned. So from an Illustrator standpoint, it's pretty phenomenal. So we're looking at the Sprout desktop right now. Very similar experience to most all-in-ones, except I have their Discovery app suite already pulled up. And I'm going to show you how I got there in just a minute. But we're going to go through the line of some of the apps that are optimized for the Sprout. First off is the little welcome app / tutorial, which they definitely recommend all new users fire up and check out. So we're going to go through this little getting started piece, and it explains a little bit about how it's got a 2D and 3D camera built in overhead that work in tandem with the touch mat. And this button in the middle here is how I got into that launcher. You just press it and you come up and you're good to go. You can also bring up a virtual keyboard. And you can do some things with the second screen, the projector itself, to manipulate whether or not you want the mat to be touch or not. For example, if you're doing something with the stylus, you want to go ahead and disable the ability to touch, so you're just using palm projection and just literally drawing with the pen, you can do that. And from there, we can toggle some of the settings and control. There's not a whole lot you can really adjust there. And then one of the more important pieces is the projector alignment itself, which really just adjusts the illumination and the lighting in the room. So if you're using a darker room like we have right now, a few overhead lights here, versus turning on the overhead lights later, we'd want to make sure that we adjust it if there's any dramatic changes in the room. So outside of that, we're good to go. We can go back into the apps and we can go ahead and launch Capture. Now, just to make things easy, I already have it pulled up here. So what we're looking at is the mat now at this point. And really cool thing is, if I am doing a presentation or if I'm trying to capture a still image, let's get that mouse out of the way, I can actually notate some of the things on the fly. So let's bring over my friend here, the skull, and let's say I needed to do a capture maybe of the side of the jaw. Here, let's have some fun. So overhead projector, good to go. I'm going to hit the capture button here, and then in just a second I should have an image with the notes already taken on it. So really helpful when we're doing any kind of 2D imaging, or if we're trying to take notes on an assignment. HP even recommends this as a cool piece for doing like a digital yearbook, for example. So if you took an image that you were working with and then went back and added some additional notes to it to sign, say, the yearbook. So now we've moved the skull out of the way, and I still have the image of the skull here. I can really go in, now I've taken a 3D image, and I can go and make some additional little comments, scribbles. Hey, let's give him a mohawk just for fun. So there's a lot you can do with the 2D side of it. Let's get out of this and let's open up the 3D side of it and do some really, really awesome captures. So we've got the 3D Capture app open now, and this is where things get really, really interesting, like you have never seen this before kind of interesting, which really ties into what we were talking about before about emerging technology and some of the things that are really compelling about this. So if we're looking at the screen, we have this sort of circle area here where they're telling you to kind of keep your hands out of that, because this is the area that they want you to place a device in to be captured. So we're using the skull again, just because it ends up being kind of the perfect size for this. So we'll start with the top of the head here. Notice that the target area became green, and there's a reason for that. So now it's looking for everything around the object that doesn't belong and making sure that everything is kind of out of the way. So at this point, it's just capturing the surface of what we want. So we're going to go ahead and hit the capture button. And if you're seeing what I'm seeing, we've got some almost kind of a grainy pixelation where it just started to capture the top of the head of the skull. So what we're going to go ahead and do is manually, with our hands, rotate the skull and capture more of it as we go. It's just slowly bringing it across on its X and Y axis. So we'll rotate it a couple different ways here. But you can see what really is interesting is that even though my hands currently are being used to manually rotate this, because of the previous capture that we started with, it already realized that they didn't belong in what I wanted to ultimately capture. So it's actively removing my hands from the image that we're trying to get as we slowly move it around and get every little piece in. Almost like we're, I don't know, baking with something and we're trying to kind of roll something over a surface, like roll the dough around, that we're trying to get all of the little bits kind of covered, all of the digital information. See how I just turned a little too fast and told us to slow down. So we're trying to do this thing justice and get a pretty decent capture. So we've got the majority of it figured out. We're going to bring it back down again. Looks good. And we're going to hit the stop button here, because now, notice the screen's turned to black and white. What it's going to be looking for, it's going to take high-res images of the texture that it wants to map over our 3D object. So again, hold the image still, take a shot of it, and notice how that area changed in color just a little bit. So we've got some of it figured out. And as we go, we're just taking more pictures to give it more information. Because similar to, if any of you have taken a panoramic photo or a photosphere before, you follow the dotted lines, you kind of follow along, and behind the scenes the camera does the rest, or the phone typically does the rest, and puts all of those bits together for you. So that's what we're trying to do right now. We've got, looks like just about all of those black and white areas filled in. And this should turn out pretty good. So put the hand back down again, hit the check mark for done. Okay, so that'll just take a minute or two to render. And while it's doing that, I might as well just let you know what we have under the hood and what's making it do what it's doing right now. In addition to obviously the crazy wizardry we see with the extra cameras and the floor mat and everything else that it's doing, the horsepower that's running under the hood is an i7-7700T, 16 gigs of DDR4, and a 960M GTX processor. So what's pretty cool is that the GTX, the NVIDIA processor, the GPU, works in tandem with the graphics on the CPU, so that you can do some of the things just from a normal desktop standpoint that work really well on the CPU's processing power. And when we're doing rendering like this, we can hit the GPU hard and we can get them done that much faster. So just for the sake of saving a little bit of time, I've got that skull already wrapped up and good to go, so we're going to take a look at it now. And here we have it in their View 3D file. You can see the amount of detail it was able to pull in with the captures it did on the side. And this was all by hand. I mean, that's the important thing to really stress here, is that you can really quickly do a hand capture and get some really, really interesting stuff. Here's another one we have here as an example. A lot of texture, a lot of information. Turned out really, really good. So I know I've shown you some really cool things here, but I know I also promised you at the beginning of this webcast that we would address some of the buzzwords that are out there, like STEM and STEAM, and how this product would actually fit into a curriculum in terms of how it would enhance it. So just so we're aware really quick, STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. STEAM, same amount of information, except we're adding an A. We're adding art into that mix. So science, technology, art, engineering, and math. So picture, if you will, a pottery class that has just finished their initial project. They've got their object ready to fire up in the kiln, and they're trying to figure out what kind of color they might want to do. We could 3D scan that piece of pottery, and we could go into a program like 3D Paint, and we could manipulate that color to figure out, before we commit to putting it in the oven, what that might look like. Or we could take that program and send that out across the country to share with other students, to share with other classrooms. Maybe a classroom that has a full makerspace, that has 3D printing capabilities, to potentially run a print program to see what that final would look like, to have new technology and classic technology merging together. So to give you an example, my 11-year-old daughter did that with the skull that we just captured. So let's take a look at that in Microsoft's Paint 3D. So as you can see, there's our buddy. And what she added was, and this took her literally about 20 minutes, turned him into a pirate. I think we might have had a couple little mistakes here. I think I might have done some doodles here there. Okay, yep, that was me. But you can see again how powerful this is. So engineering is another great example. Let's picture for a moment a woodshop class. That's, it's a semester, so they're really only getting a little bit of a time to work on a project. Maybe this project is that they all have to design a giant clothespin. These kids make this product, they're proud of it, they have their final result. What if they were able to take that and 3D scan their final result and take it into a 3D printer and replicate that, so they can hand it out, maybe a miniature version of it to friends and family. Just another something that they can take with them that can further enhance and immerse them in what it is that they're learning, which is really what the Sprout is all about. And really, we've only covered 2 pieces of the curriculum, right, between art and engineering. They're also positioning this in English, in extracurricular things like the yearbooks I mentioned before, social studies, life sciences, doing overhead projection of a dissection, for example, coding in world languages. And you might think world languages, what would you be doing in different languages with this? Just like I had shown you before, where we were notating directly on the skull, what if we were able to take, say, a class learning Chinese and actually by hand trace the examples that they were trying to learn, just to make sure that they had some accuracy from what they were trying to replicate. Again, there's a lot of things that it can do, but what you, the VAR, must do is find out from these schools where their strong suits are, where their focuses are in their curriculums, to see where this can maximize their efforts. Another good example would be if you're getting quotes at this point. I know I've mentioned it a few times, this is the Swiss Army knife is what I like to refer to it as, because it has such a powerful, robust overhead scanner. If you're getting requests for a document scanner, it might be worth looking into introducing the Sprout, because it does that and so much more. If you're getting requests from schools that in an art department to look at art pads and digitizers, again, another great example to introduce the Sprout, because we have a full-blown computer that can handle all of what we're doing on the mat as well. So I know we've talked about emerging technology, but you, again, as the VAR, need to come up with a plan. HP and D&H is absolutely here to support you in presenting this. Now, let's look at the other side of the table here and get into the virtual reality and augmented reality. Another great example of kind of the same thinking as far as just finding out where we can fit this into a curriculum. So to talk about virtual reality and augmented reality is to kind of look at where things are and where they're going, which is, again, a big part of what we wanted to cover today in the webcast. So if we look at the Google side of virtual reality, we look at Project Cardboard as it was originally introduced a few years ago. It was literally as it implies. You as a consumer could DIY a virtual reality kit with a few magnets and a few lenses. It took some time and it took some effort, but once it was all said and done, here you had applications that were already designed for your existing phone, doing something more with something that you already had that could then immerse you in a virtual experience that thousands of people are developing for currently now. But what they've done over the years is they've fine-tuned it. We've presented some headsets that do a little bit more than just the cardboard experience, where they have built-in headphones, for example. Now, Google Cardboard has evolved a bit into Google Daydream. And what Daydream is, same sort of idea where you're taking a phone, a device, placing it inside of a headset. However, the difference is we now have a standalone remote that acts as a little bit more than just point and click. It actually syncs up to your experience, so that, like, let's say, for example, you're in an app that's a cave. You're looking around in this cave, but you have a flashlight, and you can literally take that light and move it to the left and right as you're moving your head independently of this. So very similar to Nintendo's Wii Remote from back in the day. It just has that level of immersive technology, and it just brings you right into every experience that much more clearly. However, just to be clear, cardboard isn't going away. It's definitely still a viable piece in the VR market, and that is what Google Expeditions up to this point has been built around. Now, Daydream with Worldsense is slightly different than Daydream in a few major ways, in the sense that you are still running the same sorts of applications. They're still developing for that entire platform. You still have a standalone dedicated remote. However, whereas currently with Project Daydream, where you're adding a phone, typically something in the pixel caliber, a flagship higher-end phone that's going to bring the price point up to more of a prosumer level, the Daydream with Worldsense units will be an all-included standalone headset. At the moment, there are 2 developers, HTC and Lenovo. They will have products out sometime this fall. Now, just like I did earlier in the webcast when we were talking about some of this emerging technology and I got done talking and wanted to just show you what was happening with this HP Sprout, I want to show you these examples of this VR that we're talking about today. So what we're looking at behind us is an example of a mock classroom in Google Expeditions. So just to explain what I have set up behind the scenes real quick here so you realize how we got here. Each one of these is represented by a device. I have my teacher device here, I have a student VR headset here, and I have a student standalone phone here. They're all synced up to Google Expeditions. This is the Expeditions app, and I've got I'm guiding as the teacher right now. You can choose between lead or follow, so they're set up to follow me. And the reason this is all synced up is that we're using just a standard router that has no internet connection at the moment, that's just collaborating back and forth. Now, I had an internet connection previously on just the teacher device so that I could download this trip as an example, but what I'm doing is once I take these kids, they're ready to roll. Once the class is ready to start the trip, you select what you want. We're going to go and look at some extinct dinosaurs here. And at this point, once I hit start, it should transition them right in, just as we saw here, to this 360 example. So the really nice thing for the teachers is that, and again, teacher device here, I've got a wealth of content available. And just so we understand what Expeditions really is, this is literally a 360-degree photo. Well, he's not quite extinct, but here we go. We have a 360-degree photo that we're looking at, and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these out there on the Expeditions main app at this point. You just choose into, you download it, and you're off and running. But at this point, I've got a variety of information within this one 360-degree photo that I can steer these kids towards. Say we want to talk about the actual meteorite up there, and you can see kind of the faces here. That's representative of the actual students that are in this. So we can see this one moving around a little bit. That is the student looking up towards this meteorite. So if I want them to focus on that, I've got an actual wealth of information I can read off about that talking point. And they see, if they're off looking at maybe this arrow tells them to come back and look at this section so we can find out a little bit more about that specific point. But that, in a nutshell, is Expeditions. And because of what we're actually looking at, it doesn't require a whole lot of hardware from the student side or from the teacher side to really pull this off. So it's really brought the price point down and made it very affordable. And the Expeditions app itself is free. So that being said, this was just one quick example. Picture, if you will, we're a social studies class and we're learning about recycling. I saw an Expeditions trip previously that took kids to a recycling plant in New York to see all the individual steps that recyclables go through to be broken down and reused and ultimately recycled. Great way to add to really any curriculum where it might not be an opportunity to actually take a field trip to this recycling plant, but to take a virtual field trip at any point in this kind of a format. Now, I've showed you a little bit more of a DIY approach today, but I'm here to let you know that we do have the ability to pre-configure these kits for you. D&H does have VR Expedition kits available. They come in a few different flavors via our white glove services, which I'll explain in a second. But the last thing that I want to mention before we get too far off the virtual reservation, if you will, is that you notice how I've got the same sort of experience from the headset as I do on this actual stick here. So I have the ability to actually look through and see this sort of a format. Ultimately, there's another section of Expeditions coming out this fall called Expeditions AR, and AR, augmented reality. The main difference I can tell you for right now is that whereas we're in Expeditions VR, or virtual reality, we're going to this extinct example and we're looking at this content and getting this information. We're going into a photo. With AR, augmented reality, we're bringing aspects of that information to the classroom. So say we needed to put a dinosaur in the middle of the floor. If the teacher was set up in that lesson plan to be able to do that through the application, suddenly it would just appear there because of how augmented reality works. You'll hear a code word out there called Project Tango. That's Google's play on a standardized platform to support augmented reality, specifically for Google Expeditions, AR, among many other things. But really, it's the introduction of 2 cameras on the phone to get a sense of depth to create that augmented reality. You may have also heard that term if we've ever played Pokemon Go before. A little bit different than that, though, whereas you're not just looking at a standard image in front of you that you're doing something with and interacting with. You're literally walking around a space and getting a sense of how 3D it is and how real it feels in the existing classroom or the existing space that you're in. So, covered a lot of stuff. What I want to do is tie it all together now again with the VR portion and talk about some of the things that we're doing behind the scenes in our white glove facilities to make this easier to purchase and make this easier to deploy. What I want to do real quick is break down what's actually included in them and how flexible we are in creating them. We have a 10-pack and a 30-pack, and those include a customized Pelican case to store all of the units in. Each one of those kits comes with a Hyper VR virtual reality headset that I showed you on the table here today. They'll come with a teacher tablet, the student devices, the individual phones, all of which will be pre-configured along with a router for Google Expeditions. We also have an option that is BYOD, meaning the teachers or students would bring their own devices. And the last thing that we can do, which I'm getting a lot of praise on, is that we have the ability to be completely flexible from even that configuration where we forego the case, the Pelican case, and we look at any combination that we need to. We have the ability to spin up as little as 2 or 3 devices if that's the request, or be as flexible as doing 33. Maybe not 33 and a half, but 33. As an example, we can do really any customization that we want to. And that's because D&H has been evolving as a company with our service offering in white glove for the past several years now. And I'm happy to bring this level of customization into the portfolio for this year by also reminding you that we have another piece that we added a few months ago, which was the ability to do green shipping. Now, green shipping, as it implies, is a little bit of a cut down on the additional product boxes. What we're doing is we're making sure that they ship in the most secure way by putting them multiple units in an overbox and charging a nominal fee to dispose of the cardboard on-prem, but make sure all the things that are included, like the warranty cards, the adapters, and the devices are all combined in one box so we can send them out to you and get it to the schools so they can just grab and go. The other thing that I want to remind everyone again of is the huge improvements in the volume of orders that we've seen in our laser etching services. Here's my shameless advertising here. So we've seen, again, massive improvements in the amount of volume because our quality has remained top-notch and our ability to configure each file has remained top-notch. We make recommendations on the orders that come in based on the material that they're going to be etched on. And we give mock-up examples prior to doing an etch so we make sure that everyone's on the same page and we're getting the exact result that we want. An example of where etching makes sense. If the students are taking the devices home and the school really wants to make sure that their logos stay on, that a tag information stays on, laser etching does make a lot of sense because after wear and tear, anything or tampering can occur on the tag side. But we've also even seen some examples of etching and tag being requested just because there's that much of a concern about the brand. And I'm happy to say that at this point, a year plus into that offering, we've seen dozens and dozens and dozens of the same schools coming back, the same type of repeat business because our quality has remained consistent. So thank you very much for taking the time to join me today in looking at future technology, some of it a little bit further out, some of it here today, and some of it we've been offering that we wanted to just remind you of again. If you have any questions about anything that you've seen today, please don't hesitate to email solutionslab@dnh.com or presales support@dnh.com. Thank you again and have a great day.